Today's intelligence report opens with a deep dive summary on numbers in the Ethiopian Bible, focusing on what the book communicates, how it functions, and why it still matters. Since no single chapter has been selected, we are treating the request as a book-level briefing, while answering the chapter-style questions in a way that applies to the larger unit of Numbers. In brief, Numbers is a wilderness book. It follows Israel after deliverance from Egypt and before full entry into the Promised Land. Its world is one of movement, waiting, testing, leadership pressure, community discipline, worship, rebellion, judgment, mercy, and preparation. In the Ethiopian biblical tradition, as in other Christian traditions that preserve the Torah or Pentateuch, Numbers belongs to the foundational story of God forming a people. It is not merely a list of census totals or ancient travel records. It is a theological report on a community learning what it means to live under divine covenant while moving through uncertainty.
That summary is important because the title Numbers can make the book sound cold or statistical, but the book is full of human drama. The counting of the people matters because it shows organization, identity, military readiness, tribal structure, and accountability. But the deeper concern is not arithmetic. The deeper concern is whether the people who have been rescued can trust, obey, worship, and endure. Numbers repeatedly places the audience in a tension between promise and delay. The people are not back in Egypt, but they are not yet settled in the land. They are between rescue and fulfillment. That in-between space becomes the testing ground. The immediate context is therefore the wilderness journey of Israel. It is a transitional context, and transitions reveal character. In Numbers, fear, complaint, unbelief, faith, intercession, and leadership all become visible.
For immediate context, the book begins with the community arranged and counted. The people are not presented as a random crowd. They are organized by tribes, placed around the sacred center, and prepared for movement. This tells us that worship and order belong together. The presence of God is not treated as an accessory, it stands at the center of communal life. As the book develops, however, the organized camp becomes a troubled camp. Complaints arise. Challenges to leadership appear. The people struggle with scarcity, distance, memory, and fear. The wilderness is not only a geographical setting, it becomes a spiritual environment where trust is tested. So the immediate context is a people on the move, but also a people under examination.
The book context is the larger sequence of the first 5 books of the Bible. Numbers does not stand alone. It comes after the story of creation, covenant beginnings, bondage, exodus, law, sanctuary instruction, and priestly holiness. By the time we reach Numbers, the people have already been delivered and instructed. The question now becomes, can they live as the covenant people during the journey? The book looks backward to deliverance and forward to inheritance. It shows that liberation is not the same thing as maturity. A people may leave slavery, but still have to be formed in faith, responsibility, patience, and obedience. That is one of the core intelligence findings of the book. Numbers is about formation under pressure.
Historically and culturally, Numbers reflects an ancient world where tribal identity, household structure, priestly service, sacrifice, camp arrangement, inheritance, vows, purity, and leadership authority all carried communal significance. In such a setting, census material was not merely clerical. Counting, fighting men, arranging the camp, assigning duties, and defining boundaries were ways of preserving the life of the people. The culture assumed that the community's relationship with God affected social order, military readiness, worship, and survival. The wilderness environment also matters. Scarcity makes dependence unavoidable. In a harsh setting, water, food, direction, and leadership are never abstract issues. They are life and death issues. That is why complaints in Numbers carry such serious weight. They are not just expressions of discomfort, they expose whether the community trusts the God who brought them out.
The canonical context asks how Numbers fits inside the wider Bible. It functions as part of the great storyline that moves from creation to covenant, from promise to peoplehood, from deliverance to land, and eventually into the broader biblical themes of kingdom, exile, restoration, and redemption. Numbers contributes a sobering theme. The people of God can be near sacred things and still struggle with unbelief. It also contributes a hopeful theme. Divine judgment does not erase divine faithfulness. Even when one generation fails, the promise continues. That combination matters canonically. Numbers helps later readers understand why faithfulness, obedience, intercession, holiness, and perseverance are recurring biblical concerns. The wilderness becomes a memory that later communities can use as warning, instruction, and encouragement.
Now let's identify the kind of writing. Numbers is mixed literary material. It includes narrative, law, census records, travel notices, ritual instruction, speeches, genealogical or tribal organization, and poetic or oracular material in certain sections. It is not a modern novel, not a simple law code, and not merely an archive. It is theological history shaped for instruction. The narrative tells what happened in the journey, while the legal and census materials show how the community was structured before God. The combination is deliberate. The story and the regulations interpret one another. The people are not only moving through space, they are being shaped into an ordered covenant community.
Observation asks, what does the text actually say? At the book level, Numbers says that Israel was counted, arranged, instructed, and led through the wilderness. It says the people repeatedly faced hardship and responded in ways that revealed both faith and failure. It says leaders bore heavy burdens. It says rebellion had consequences. It says intercession mattered. It says worship required reverence. It says the journey was not chaotic in God's design, even when the people's conduct became unstable. It says a generation that was delivered could still miss the fullness of the promise through unbelief and disobedience. It also says the story did not end with failure because preparation continued for the next stage. That is a crucial observation. The book is severe, but it is not hopeless.
Authorial intent asks what the intended meaning would have been for the original audience. At a careful level, we can say the book was meant to instruct the covenant community about identity, worship, leadership, obedience, and trust during the journey toward the promised future. It warned the audience not to romanticize the past, not to despise divine provision, not to treat holy things lightly, and not to allow fear to overrule promise. It taught that the community belonged to God, and therefore had to be ordered around God's presence. It also taught that failure has consequences, especially when the failure is not ignorance, but persistent distrust after deliverance. For the original audience, Numbers would have functioned as memory, warning, and preparation.
The main idea or central message of Numbers can be stated this way. God faithfully leads and forms his people through the wilderness, but the community must respond with trust, obedience, reverence, and perseverance. That central message is supported by the details. The census supports it by showing that the people are known, counted, and organized. The camp arrangement supports it by placing divine presence at the center. The travel material supports it by showing that the journey has direction. The complaint stories support it by showing what happens when fear and resentment dominate memory. The leadership challenges support it by showing the danger of rejecting appointed order. The laws and ritual instructions support it by showing that worship and daily life must be integrated. The movement toward the land supports it by showing that the promise remains active, even when the journey is delayed.
Some difficult words and cultural references need clarification. Census language can feel remote, but in this context, it signals identity, responsibility, and readiness. The wilderness is not just empty land, it is the place of dependence and testing. Tribal arrangement may sound administrative, but it reflects kinship, inheritance, defense, and social structure. Priestly service may feel specialized, but it shows that worship required care and boundaries. Holiness is not merely moral seriousness, it includes being set apart for God's purposes. Complaint, in this book, is not simply honest sorrow. At key moments, it becomes a rejection of trust. Intercession means standing between judgment and the people, pleading for mercy. These terms matter because without them, Numbers can be misread as either a dry record or a harsh story. In reality, it is a disciplined theological account of life with God in the wilderness.
The connection to the bigger story of the Bible is powerful. Numbers shows that the path from deliverance to inheritance is not automatic in the sense of human response. God's promise is faithful, but the people are called to live in trusting obedience. The wilderness becomes one of the Bible's great images for testing, dependence, purification, and preparation. Later, biblical reflection often returns to wilderness themes because they reveal the heart. Do the people trust God when resources seem limited? Do they remember deliverance accurately, or do they distort the past? Do they accept formation, or demand comfort without transformation? Numbers also deepens the Bible's portrayal of leadership. Leaders must guide, intercede, endure criticism, and remain accountable. The story is not only about the crowd, it is also about the burden of shepherding a difficult people.
Application today begins with the recognition that many people live in wilderness seasons. A wilderness season is not necessarily literal desert travel. It can be a season between jobs, between grief and healing, between calling and fulfillment, between escape from a destructive past and arrival at a stable future. Numbers teaches that the in-between is spiritually significant. It asks whether we will allow hardship to rewrite our memory. It asks whether we will confuse discomfort with abandonment. It asks whether we will keep worship at the center when circumstances feel unsettled. It also challenges communities to value order, accountability, and reverence. Freedom without formation can become chaos. Numbers says that rescued people still need discipline, memory, humility, and trust.
It also applies to leadership and public life. Communities under pressure often turn on their leaders, idealize the past, or fracture into factions. Numbers does not pretend that leadership is easy. It shows pressure from above, below, and within. But it also refuses to treat rebellion as harmless. A community's speech, memory, and trust can determine whether it moves forward or collapses into cycles of complaint. For modern listeners, that is a serious warning. Whether in families, faith communities, institutions, or nations, the wilderness exposes what people truly believe. The book calls for mature memory. Remember deliverance, remember provision, remember purpose, and do not let fear become the narrator of the journey.
Let me make the point as directly as possible. Numbers is not a book about ancient people who were uniquely difficult. It is a mirror. It asks what happens when people receive grace but still struggle to trust the giver. It asks what happens when the future is promised but not immediate. It asks how a community organizes itself around what is sacred. It asks whether we can remain faithful when the road is longer than expected. That is why the book remains relevant. It is about the space between promise and possession, between identity and maturity, between rescue and readiness.
Before we close, this deep dive is exactly the kind of work we value on The New Sentinel. The New Sentinel is a podcast dedicated to in-depth discussions and deep dives across a wide range of topics. From the glitz and glamour of pop culture to the strategic intricacies of military operations, the mission is to cover it all with clarity and substance. Each episode is crafted to give listeners a comprehensive understanding of the subject, using careful analysis, engaging storytelling, and conversations designed to keep people informed and entertained. If you enjoy thoughtful breakdowns like this one, tune in, view, subscribe, and comment. And if you are an entrepreneur, The New Sentinel can help you advertise your product or service to an audience that values depth, curiosity, and serious discussion.
Final assessment. Numbers in the Ethiopian Bible, considered as part of the sacred biblical tradition, is a strategic text for understanding how a delivered people are formed in the wilderness. Its immediate context is movement through uncertainty. Its book context is the journey from Exodus toward promised inheritance. Its historical and cultural context includes tribal order, priestly worship, leadership authority, and survival in a harsh environment. Its canonical context places it within the larger biblical story of promise, covenant, failure, mercy, and preparation. Its writing style is mixed: narrative, law, census, travel record, ritual instruction, and theological history. It's observationally